All right.
All right, well, welcome to our training, Tip 101, Organizing for Economic Justice.
Awesome. So we did a great job checking in on our assignments, some housekeeping stuff. And again, you know who we are at the Civic Lab. We're just honored to be here and to be part of your professional identity formation track that you're all in. And we're hoping that we continue the process after you graduate. We're still going to be out here, so you never know. Or by the time you're done with this training, this interest, you'll be sick of us, so maybe not. We'll see.
And
Anyways,
as we mentioned last night, Jonathan was honored with the 2021 Champion of Social Justice Award by the Chicago African Americans in Philanthropy. The link to watch the video is there. The portion there is about 6.5 minutes long, and it's the introduction and Jonathan's acceptance speech. And we'll put that in the chat in just a minute.
oh, awesome. Okay. Thank you, Tom. Always throwing stuff in there. Curveballs. Great. Awesome. So now we're going to community organizing 101. Yay. Now we're getting to the skills piece, right? So we're going to give you a baseline of what is and what isn't community organizing. What are the tenets and the elements and the ingredients of being a phenomenal organizer? And so that's March 6th, same time here, 12 to 3. And then Saturday, April 10th, we're going to start moving you towards helping us do some outreach to your friends, to your colleagues, in terms of the April 10th Harambe. This will be our third Harambe we've done in the city. The previous 2 months went really well in face-to-face. This is our one of our first ones, our first one on virtual. All right. Now, I think that's it, right?
And we invite you to look at this resource online at tiffreports.com. There's a lot of data there. There's a lot of material that we've placed on that website that has to do with tax increment financing. The TIF Illumination Project started here in Chicago in 2013. It was a group of organizers that came together from different social change groups with this public meeting at the Chopin Theater over on Division Street. And even though it was the night of Barack Obama's inaugural address to the nation, we still had about 250 people show up. And you can see the participants were myself, Professor Richard Dye from the University of Illinois, Ben Jaworski, the great journalist from the Chicago Reader, and the noted activist and educator Valerie Leonard, who was our mistress of ceremonies. And that was the debut of this particular work. And we basically gave an explanation of how TIFs worked and what TIFs were doing in the community, which we were in that night, which was the 27th ward. So we passed out a nice flyer and explained a lot of information about what TIFs were doing in that community. And we said to the participants, if you want this kind of presentation for your ward, go home and organize it and give us a call. Not really knowing if we hit a nerve or if there'd be a lot of interest. Well, it turns out there was a huge interest. It's like we hit a gusher, as they say in Texas. So now we've done 170 public meetings from that day to right this minute. And we've been in every ward all over the city. And you can see people show up and we have no marketing, we can't take out any ads. It's all word of mouth, grassroots. So that's a little bit of the history of this public work, and it just doesn't stop. As I mentioned before, we're working with a group in Homewood. We're working with people in Detroit, Cincinnati. This stuff is all over the country. All right. What is a tax increment financing district? Why are we so obsessed with this thing here at the Civic Lab? All right. They are created by your municipality under state law. So across the state of Illinois, a city like Chicago or Wilmette or Bolingbrook or Rockford or what have you, all can gin up TIFs. They're all by themselves. So the TIFs of Chicago are particular to us, and they don't bump up or they don't interfere or have anything to do with the TIFs of Evanston, even though they're right above us geographically. So they're all self-contained. They're designed to subsidize some business project. That is to say, to give public money to a private business in order to make that project happen. And it's supposed to be in a blighted area or an underserved area, which is usually code for communities of color or poor communities where for one reason or another, development is not happening. And in order to make a TIF happen, in order to start that transfer of public money to a private project, you also have to show that the project cannot happen without that public subsidy. And it's called the but-for test. That is to say, but for the public money, the project could not happen. So think about that for a second. We were talking about how capitalism works in a marketplace. So say that I'm a developer, Tresser Development, and I want to build a little strip mall on 119th Street. Well, I have to buy the land, so I have to figure out who the owner is. I have to approach them or somehow make an offer. So I have to acquire the land. That's me, Tom Tresser, and my company. I have to hire an architect to sketch what that mall might look like. And it's going to have a dry cleaner and a 7-Eleven and a pizzeria or whatever that makes sense for that community. I have to find the tenants. I have to somehow advertise. I have to hire somebody who knows who the subway manager is of this district. And so how do I figure out, how do I get, my tenants? I've got to advertise that I'm going to build a mall, and I got to figure out who's going to be, Jonathan Peck, he's my friend. He said he wanted to start a florist shop. I should call Jonathan. Maybe he'll take one of those storefronts and he'll do his shop there. But it's on me as the developer. All right, now I have to hire a construction manager to build this thing. I got the architect with the plans, and it's a simple build. It's a one-story. Like you've seen many malls. 6 to 7 shops plus surface parking and lighting and so forth. Well, I have to now go to my bank, because I personally don't have $6 million in my bank account right now to fund this project. So I go to my bank and I say, I'm Tom Tresser, the developer, and I have a good portfolio of history of projects. And here's my little plan for this mall on 119th Street. And we know that there's a lot of people who live near here, and I think we're going to have good traffic and we'll have good revenues. And so I need a construction loan of $4 million. I have $1 million of my own in equity, but I need a total of $5 million. So can we talk turkey? The bank looks at me and goes, well, you're reputable. You seem to have a history of doing good projects. However, Tom, the place where you want to build this mall is blighted. It's a bunch of poor Black people live there. And that makes us nervous, because maybe they don't have the money to buy the things that you're going to sell in your mall, or maybe they're going to steal from you. Maybe the businesses that you want to invite to use the mall are stupid, or they don't know how to operate, and so there's a lot of risk. And I'm speaking rather bluntly, but that's kind of how this thing works. So the bank says to me, "All right, Tom, you're picking a very blighted and troubled area for a project. And because it's so risky, we would have to lend you money at like a 30% rate. So if you want to take the risk, we're willing to give you, but it's a 30% rate." And I say, I can't possibly pay that back. I can't make it work. I need a more reasonable rate, or I need somebody to subsidize. So I'm not asking the bank for $5 million. Maybe I'm only asking them for $2 million, and that might be able to work something out. Where can I go to get some free money? This is where the TIF project comes in. The TIF project says, we want a mall, even though it's owned by Tom Tresser, we want a mall in this blighted community. So we're going to help you out, Tom. We're going to give you up to 30% free money to make your mall happen. So you can put your own money in, you get the construction loan at a modest fee, so it's not crazy, and we'll make up the difference. And then you can go ahead and build your mall. So I would say to you or the public, I'd say, you see, I tried to get a commercial loan, but I couldn't do it. So, but for this infusion of cash, my project could not happen. All right, so that's a little bit of the rationale about why a TIF is created in the first place and who benefits from it. Now, what happens after the TIF is created, the TIF captures the new property tax value created in the TIF zone, and we're going to talk about that in detail in a moment. It's only for hard costs. So I say, I'm going to build something, I'm going to clear it. I've got maybe there's some a crappy building that I've got to demolish. And then of course I'm going to lay concrete and build this mall. That's what we're talking about, the hard costs of building something. It is not for hiring teachers or librarians or doctors or artists or sports coaches or anything like that. So it's not as if I operate a clinic, the Tresser Clinic, let's say, and I just need 5 nurses to deal with COVID, and I'm going to give out free vaccinations. You know, I'm going to go buy on the open market vaccines from Johnson & Johnson, and I'm just going to give them away to the people. And so could I get TIF money for that? No. If I'm the public librarian, you know, I operate the branch library, and I would like to hire 2 more librarians, one in Spanish language and also to keep the library open to midnight, because I know a lot of people in my community work double shifts, and it would be really helpful for them to have access to the library, you know, when they get, no, I can't hire a library. So it's only for building stuff. The TIF district itself lasts for 23 years. And where the money is collected, it's supposed to be spent, and we'll see how that works. All right, so that's the highlights. Now let's talk about particulars and get into the weeds here. This is a real TIF district in the West Side, in the 24th Ward. This is an African American community in Lawndale, West Lawndale, and you see the black lines of the TIF sort of traces a strange path through the community. And for some reason in this one they have a hole in it, like a donut hole. It's a little mystery, frankly, how they draw these lines, but that is done by the city. Now, what happened here is when this TIF district was drawn, they count up all the properties inside the black lines. And let's say, for the sake of our argument, there was 1,000 properties inside the black lines. The city then says to the county, here are all the properties that are in our brand new TIF district. Please tell us how much property tax each property has paid in the latest year. So that information is held by the county clerk. So the county will say, okay, thank you for this list of all these properties, or sometimes they're called PIN numbers, property identification numbers. Each property will have a PIN number. And here's the answer. For those 1,000 properties that you've given us, they are paying $1,000 in property taxes. So good. We now know that inside this little TIF district, the 1,000 properties are throwing off $1,000 in property taxes. That is called the base. So this is a very important term. You should write this down and underline it with 3 lines, not 2 lines. You should underline it with 3 lines. The base is how much money is going to the units of government in property taxes as this TIF is turned on. Now you'll see this famous diagram anytime you are talking about TIFs. And what it means is this. The dark blue represents the amount of property taxes being generated by the inside the TIF district, and in our example, it's $1,000. This $1,000 are flowing to the units of government in this region that use property taxes, and it's flat. So $1,000 is being collected here by those properties, and the same amount is going to the units of government there 23 years later. Can anyone just come off mute and just say, what is the problem with that? What is problematical about that condition? Is the price of goods going to be the same in 23 years? Anybody? Don't be shy.
No,
No. What's going to happen?
I would guess that it would be inflated. That
Sure. Is anything the same price as it was 3 years ago?
no.
No. So we have a bit of a problem by saying the amount of money flowing from all those properties going to operate our units of government will be the same as they are as they were 23 years ago. So that's a problem with this program right away. Okay. So the price of chalk, the price of steel, the price of anything you think about is going to go way up, possibly by 200%. So if you think about, the price of gas in the early 80s, I remember when it was like 95 cents a gallon, and that's just the way the world works. Okay. Well said. What we say at Civic Lab is that blue money, the money that's being collected by the Tiff, is going to the use of public uses that are on the books, that are in the public budgets that we can get to look at every year as the city and county make up their budgets. But the money that's being collected by the Tiff, that is to say, all that money, every dollar of new increment goes to the piggy bank that's controlled by the mayor. So let's take a look at that here. Say in year 5, the amount of taxes being thrown off by those properties inside the TIF district are now, let's say, $3,000. So what's happened in years 1 to 5? Well, maybe there's new construction. So something that wasn't in the TIF district is now there, and that's generating property tax. Let's also say that the properties that are in the TIF district are increasing in value. So they're worth more than they were. So instead of just $1,000, now the properties are worth $3,000. So the difference between the base and the amount in year 5 is $2,000. 3 minus 2 equals 1. So that $2,000 is collected by the TIF district. It's sequestered, it's held in a special account. Now say over here in year 15, say now there's been more construction and the property values continue to rise. So now let's say it's now $8,000 in property taxes. So again, the difference between 8,000 and 1,000, that's the increment, is 7. And so on for each and every year over the life of the TIF of 23 years. So that is to say, each year, money is flowing into this TIF account, and that's held by the TIF. So we say that money is off the books. Okay. Now, before we could go any further, we have to take a look at what potential harms might be here. So, Jonathan, you pick it up?
Right. Thanks, Tom. So we want to just have a moment, a brief pause moment, and we're going to have a conversation. And we wanted to sort of look at what's the impact of all this, right? So can we agree that we understand that this comes from property taxes, right? That's one thing we've learned. And so what do property taxes pay for? And this is an opportunity for Deshara. What do you think property taxes pay for? From your experience, what do taxes pay for?
Goods and services in the community.
Yes, and what are, right, it's right there, public goods and public services. And let's identify those services and good? What are those everyday things, those everyday services and goods that all of us use?
Like the roads,
Public roads, right? Everybody uses public roads, right? Companies, right, need public roads, right? We all use the roads, right? What other services outside of public? What'd you say, Dana?
School districts.
Schools, public schools, right? School districts, CPS, Chicago Public Schools, absolutely. And then what else? There's other services. Put them out there.
The library.
Did you say libraries? Yep, public libraries, huge thing. Yep, we use the public library. That's where that's where we get books for my kids to read. We go to the branch, the local branch, and we check in and check out books at a time. So public libraries, absolutely. And so, anything else besides libraries? You got libraries, schools, public roads and transportation. There's already what other services? I want to get them all out in front of us. The big ones. I mean, you guys mentioned it earlier in your check-in. I'm going to go outside to do what? You're going to go outside and walk on the streets?
parks.
Yeah, parks, open space, right? Right? We've got, parks everywhere. Hundreds of parks, right? We have over 500, close to 600 schools, public schools, hundreds and hundreds of parks. And then let's talk about that. Who actually uses these services that you all just mentioned? Who really uses them? Who needs them? I mean, we all need them, right? But we also know who actually needs and uses them. Take a stab. Who do you think it is? Remington, Tom, Dana, who do you guys think? Lucas? Who uses all these public goods and services? We know it's the people of Chicago, but specifically which people of Chicago?
I would say children.
Children, right? And so in terms of Chicago public schools, who's actually in those schools? The top 1% of our city? Well, you're shaking your head no. So the education people, who do you think is using those services? Say it. Jump out there. It's okay to say it.
We need the pen. We need the pen. I was gonna whip my head off.
Oh, I'll be on it. Who needs it? Who uses the services, guys? Come on. Who uses public services? You guys don't know who uses the services?
We all do.
We all do, but primarily who's using them more than others in the city of Chicago? Working class people, Dana, right?
Yes.
Right, black and brown people, poor people, people who need to get to work, who live in 113th, but have to take a CTA bus and a train to go work at a hotel, to go cook in a hotel, right? Right? People who have to go bartend downtown, right? Right? CPS, majority of kids are what? Coming from working class families, you guys, right? There's a caste system inside CPS, yes. There's magnet schools and stuff like that. But the vast majority of kids are people of color and people who are coming from working class families and low income families, right? And so that's important to know that when you take money out of property taxes and you put it tips, right? What happens? Who are you taking from? Who are you taking it from, really?
Those
Are you
same
taking it
groups.
from- Huh? Say it again, Lucas?
I said those same groups.
Those same groups, right? Right? You're really doing some harm here, potentially some irreparable harm. You're extracting cents on the dollar, but the impact is huge. And so what we're seeing is that type of situation, that our public goods and public services are essentially being raided, right? Funds are being diverted to support privatization, support private efforts, right? And so if you go to the next slide, and so if you look at it, the actual services, this really highlights who the victims are when $1 of property taxes goes MIA, right? And this is the breakdown. For every $1 of Chicago property tax collected, these are the local units of government that are supposed to receive. 56 cents of that dollar is to go to what institution? The public schools. 18 cents goes to the city of Chicago, right? The city of Chicago also provides services, right? Right? Workforce development, housing services, homeless shelter services, violence prevention services. Cook County, 8 cents. Right? That's huge. The county budget, right? Parks. Over 600 parks, 6 cents. City colleges. Who uses city colleges, guys? Who actually goes to city colleges in Chicago? Have you ever been to a city college, any of you? Go visit one. Who uses those schools? Predominantly people of color and working class people in Chicago. It's a fact in practice, right? And then of course the libraries. We talked about the libraries, right? And so that's important to know that there are victims when you take and extract money from property tax, right? And the people who are utilizing these services that you see are the ones who are being harmed by this corrupt practice. Okay, so back to the tips. What are tips? So just to know, tips are created under state law, right? And the state law areas proposed for TIF designation must possess numerous blighting factors to be eligible. Okay, and so there's 13 elements, 13 designations under state law, and the big 5 are right here: age, obsolescence, code violations, excessive vacancies, and overcrowding of facilities, right? Now, in practice, blighting factors we know what they say, but we know they have been grossly exaggerated, to say the least, right? And the reason that they've been grossly exaggerated is to allow for TIF funds to be utilized by what I say the private corporate sector, right? Including millionaire venture capitalists, billionaire venture capitalists, and hardcore corporations like Hard Rock Cafe, PepsiCo, among many. Okay, and so they've been able to access TIF funds because the people doing the work, designing the TIFs, have learned how to exaggerate these blighting factors, right? And so there's a process to getting these TIFs created, right? And so in front of you, we've given you a picture of what and how a TIF is created, right? Now, there's an initial proposal that's put together by developers, and at that point, it's almost a done deal, which is kind of funny, right? But if the TIF proposal is being presented in this city, they have to get approval by the city council, but a proposal has to be developed, and it's usually in partnership with developers, their private writers, consultants, and in partnership with the local political representatives, which are our local aldermen or the mayor. And that includes, they have to present what we call an eligibility study, which will highlight those blighting factors and provide the argument for, or the rationale for establishing this TIF district. Then there's an optional early notice, right? This comes out of the Department of Community Development. Sometimes it holds neighborhoods meetings, sometimes it doesn't. It's very hard to sort of pinpoint when these notices are out there. If you do any CD work in Chicago, community development work in Chicago, it's hit and go, it's tough, hit and miss, right? And so there's an optional early notice. And then this proposal goes to the Community Development Commission. They present the eligibility studies and the redevelopment proposal. Now, if you look at the slide, you can see, hold on one second. I don't know what it is. Do something else, please. If you look at the slide, you can see that we have visuals highlighting City Hall the aldermen, city council, and the mayor. At every point of this decision-making process, it is clear that the mayor and the identified players have made the deal. But we still thought we should give you what the process looks like. Then there's a public note. The CDC must provide public notice in the local newspapers. And again, this is hit and miss. What we've seen is that this is really not being adhered to. And it's kind of like, even if it is, it's kind of a notice that's in the back pages. It's not necessarily really geared towards getting the public involved on the front end. And then ultimately it goes up to what we call the JRB, the Joint Review Board meeting, right? And this is a big turning point for a TIF proposal. Now the JRB is really where they're going to make the decision ultimately, right? And then deliver it to City Council. Now the question is, who sets up the JRB, right? The JRB is composed of what we call local taxing bodies, right? Right. So you will have a representative from Cook County. You'll have representatives from potential the Park District or from the libraries or whatever, CPS, right? And so the CEO of CPS will send their representative. Pratt Creek will send her proxy, right, to this joint review board, right? And vote in the proposal. If it fails, the city council must pass it with a 60% majority. But by and large, at the JRB, the TIFs go through. And part of the challenge is that everybody is appointed to that review board by their CEOs, including the mayor. So if there is any conflict or any potential that this TIF isn't a good idea for the neighborhood, most likely that's not going to be really listened to at that point, because everybody appointed the board were people that the mayor appointed and or Preckwinkle appointed, to be fair, right? And then it's split into two areas. One, it's a public hearing. There's a public hearing. Public comments are permitted. And the reality of that is it is a window dressing moment, right? To say to the world, we held our public hearing, but the JRB is in no means mandated to actually take into consideration what people are expressing at this public hearing. And that happened with the super mega TIFs that Manuel pushed through that you'll see in a bit. There was a public hearing. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, over 500 local Lincoln Park residents where Tom lives came out to oppose the TIF. None of that was taken into consideration by the Joint Review Board. And then of course, if it involves any rezoning or any stuff in terms of rezoning the land or the place, zoning appeals, it goes through a different process as well. But ultimately, it's what we call a whitewash situation. By the time it gets to the city council and by the time it gets out there into the public, it's pretty much a done deal, signed and delivered. There is some annual reporting that takes place now. And so that's an opportunity where we as TIF Illuminators can go get the information and digest. But you see the process at every stage. There's a sealed envelope delivered affirmatively for the TIF to be in place, despite massive resistance. And this is not, let's think about this. This happened in Lincoln Park, y'all. This is a affluent majority community, right? Residents were upset about this TIF proposal. And residents even said, put the money into neighborhoods that need it, right? But none of that was taken into consideration. And oftentimes everything's sealed at the very beginning and it's just a washout, just to claim that they've done their duty in terms of the service. And of course, here we are in terms of the mayor. This is Mayor Lightfoot. We are in this moment here with her, and it tends to mean that the TIF Yellow Brick Road, all roads lead to the mayor's office in this situation. And so the mayor has extraordinary powers. The mayor's office and the mayor, whoever the mayor is at the time, has extraordinary powers over this TIF scheme in Chicago. And so it's almost become like a slush fund. And if history is ever a lesson, we know that, you got that, Tom? I got it. We know that if we look at history as a lesson in terms of how politics are done, although we have a 50 ward council, we've seen, based on precedents that under manual, what the mayor says ultimately is what the mayor wants, the mayor gets in the city. Here's another example. Again, approved 48-0. The city council overwhelmingly approves mayor's budget with almost no debate. This is under Mayor Emanuel in 2017. 2018, only 3 dissenters, but again, vastly pushing through his budget. So we really see no area for open debate and discussion around anything, quite frankly, whether it's off the books or on the books. This is on the book budget, right? We have access to the budget. You're looking at the budget now. That budget, these are the budgets. And ideally in a democracy, there should be some robust debate about the budget. But ultimately, we continue to see budgets being approved. Now, 2020, there was some dissent. 11 aldermen from the Progressive Caucus, and some from the Black Caucus dissented. And the motives and intent behind that is mixed, right? And so again, you have to go behind the scenes and look at why are people dissenting here? Some are dissenting for self-interest in terms of their own political power. Some are dissenting because they don't agree with the budget. But in the end, the budget got through with 39 aldermen voting to approve Mayor Lightfoot budget, and it went pretty smoothly overall. Anything on that, Tom?
That's good.
Good. And if you want to look at the average, if this was a baseball score or we were looking at sports averages, the mayor's doing pretty well. We're looking at an 87% to 90% average. And you can look at the voting records of the aldermen, and you can even see next to the aldermen, Walter Burnett going down, Scott Wasbeck, who is agreeing with the mayor 100%. So the vast majority of people are 90% above in terms of aldermen. There's only a core group that's dissenting, and even then, their dissent isn't that strong enough to actually stop this from things. So we call this a rubber stamp process. It's all for show. It's a dog and pony show, and ultimately, on average, the mayor gets the approval by the city council. Cool.
All right, so that's a bit of the context of how TIFs are set up and the political reality here that it is driven by a strong executive that controls, if you will, the idea of a TIF being created, being managed, where the money from the TIF goes. If that TIF should be prematurely terminated, it's pretty much all with the mayor and her people. All right, so how big a deal are TIFs in our community? Well, in 2019, Chicago had 140 TIF districts. So you see that on the map on the left. You notice that a lot of them touch. Well, we'll talk about that in a second. The map on the right is Cook County, where there are 304 TIF districts across about 90 municipalities. So that's a total of 444 of these strange little entities called tax increment financing districts in the county of Cook. Now, I don't know if you guys like monster movies. I grew up with these wonderful movies from Universal Pictures, but one of my favorites was Frankenstein. And you may remember the doctor cobbles together the critter, and it looks pretty fearsome. And he says, "Don't worry, I have it under control. He will serve me and do my will." But guess what? The creature bursts his chains, breaks the scientist's neck, runs off, and sets the village on fire. Oh, well, and that's kind of how we look at TIFs. They've kind of gone amok. 140 TIF districts created and operating in 2019. They extracted $684 million. So remember the little exercise we just did with the TIF in the West Lawndale area, and we were saying here's how much it took in 1 year, to explain the concept. Well, this is how much money all the 140 TIFs took out off the table in 2019. So that's 684 million property tax dollars that did not make it to the list of things that you mentioned. And you said that were property taxes to be used for services to the community, roads, transit, schools, libraries, and parks. So those units of government did not get their fair share of that 684 million. And since TIFs came to Chicago back in the late 80s, we were talking about $9 billion in property taxes that didn't make it to where they were supposed to go. This is a nice visualization that shows you the growth of this particular program over the years. The blue line represents the amount of revenue that are brought in. And you can see that there's a little dip post-recession, you know, back in 2009, 2008, all that when the banks failed. But we had a quick rebound starting in 2015, going all the way to the present day, which means that, you know, Chicago's properties are resilient. And even in economic hardship places, we rebound. And Chicago's properties are worth quite a bit of money and are worth more each and every year. And that's helps the Tiff piggy bank fill up. Okay, so that's the other thing that we would notice is what happened in the early 90s in Chicago. And can anyone say politically who got elected in the early 90s? Who knows?
Wasn't it
What's
Harold
that?
Washington?
Harold Washington was elected in 1983, so he's dead. Who comes
Oh.
after him? Your Chicago politics. Come on, you guys are living in Chicago. You're going to work in Chicago. You're going to school in Chicago, or approximate. Who is the king?
Daley.
That's right. Mayor Richard M. Daley, the son of Richard J. Daley. Richard M. Daley is elected, and someone in his organization understands how these TIFs work very well, and there's an explosive growth. And it's our opinion that this TIF thing is part of how the machine operates and how they dispense power. And we can talk about that as we go forward. Now, one of the things that we do here at the Civic Lab is look at all these TIF reports. As I said, there was 140 of them in 2019. So as data nerds, or as sometimes we are called data activists, we perform the very simple service of just looking at every one of those TIF reports, which is about a 35-page document. And we extract from the document how much money, amongst other things, is left in the TIF account at the end of the year. So if you imagine your own personal checkbook, you start the year with hopefully some money in there from your prior year's activities. And say you've got a job and or maybe you're getting some help from a relative, but money is coming into your checking account, but you're also spending. You're spending on your rent and your food. Maybe you had a medical situation and you had to spend. Perhaps you are saving and you're putting money in a savings account, or perhaps you bought a car. So if you look at your checkbook at the end of the year, you'll see money in and money out. And at the end of the year, you will have a balance, and hopefully it's a good one. Well, it's the same thing for Mr. Tiff. Money in, money out, and there's money left over in that account. So there's 140 TIFs, as we said. Think of it as like 140 little bank accounts. So what we do that has turned out to be so explosively important is to simply add up how much money is left in the TIF accounts at the end of the year. It seems like a simple thing, and yet it was never done until we did it. So at the end of the year, 2019, coming into 2020, this is how much money was sitting in the TIF accounts. $1.8 billion. So these are, as we said, property tax dollars collected from all the property owners inside all the 140 TIF districts, sitting somewhere in some bank at the end of the year. Now, why is that a potentially explosive fact? Who cares?
There's other people's basic needs that are not being provided by city services.
Yeah, like for example, yeah, like what needs could be that we should be meeting, do you think, now in these times of COVID?
Healthcare.
Yeah. So healthcare could be nurses, could be PPE equipment, right? Could we talk about rent relief, perhaps, or some kind of assistance, like a cash assistance? Could that be possible? Could we be giving people groceries, or in some way helping them so they don't have to go to jobs where they're going to be infected? And now, could we be purchasing vaccinations? Should we be, not waiting for the government, the federal government? Should we just go right to Johnson & Johnson and just buy 1 million doses, potentially, right? But we're not doing any of that. So you may have a long list of things that you might think the city could use, right about now, especially in communities of color. Again, we always want to remind ourselves about a lens of racial justice and equity, because who's getting slammed the worst? Who's getting slammed the worst by COVID, students?
Small businesses.
Small
Small business.
businesses?
And
Yes.
who runs those small businesses? Which population is being disproportionately impacted in this current pandemic?
Black and brown communities.
Yes. Right. And so,
Yeah.
yes, exactly. And it's no wonder, because if the Black and brown communities are already under the thumb and under the weather and have already been sandblasted and disinvested, they're not prepared for this onslaught. They can't. Maybe people can't work remotely because they have jobs, that are more working class jobs, like at a factory, or perhaps in the store or someplace like that, where I can't work remotely. Perhaps they don't have health care. They can't call a private physician to get some assistance. Perhaps they live in crowded places of residence where maybe multiple generations are kind of living together because they're trying to save money, and they can't afford a nice spacious house with each child or resident getting their own room. Perhaps there's also instances of stress and other bad conditions of health already on this community, where people are already dying from heart disease and diabetes that afflict African Americans to a greater extent than whites. So all those things were already there, right, before COVID came upon us. So it's no wonder that Black and brown people are dying 5 to 7 times the rate of whites. And so you would say potentially that this is a human rights issue. We shouldn't be sitting on any money whatsoever. If the city has money to spend, my goodness, wouldn't this be a good time to get it out, right, into the street or something, because it's literally a matter of life and death. All right. Well, across the state of Illinois, TIFs are very present. So it's not just a Chicago thing. They are in 559 cities or municipalities across our great state. And since TIFs came to the state in the early 80s, they have taken or extracted $22 billion. So this is across every city in the state of Illinois. And we find that this thing is not even just isolated here, but it's in 49 states across the union. And we think that these TIFs, 20,000 TIF districts, are extracting $40 billion a year. $40 billion a year of property taxes going missing across the nation each and every year. That is a huge sum of money, even for a massive country like ours. All right, to sum up, here's what we know about TIFs. They take your property taxes. It's the increment collected inside the TIF district over that base. Remember that base. They're run by the city or a city, meaning the mayor. They last for 23 years. And don't ask me why, but that's just in the statute. It's like a biblical generation. They're supposed to be created only when there's blight and but-for conditions are satisfied. They're only to be used to build something. So in your work as social justice champions, as practitioners, you can't be hired by TIF money. So if you're going into clinical psychology, if you're going into community policing, if you're going to be a public health nurse, if you're going to be a teacher, or any other of these things that require, a human being to meet with another human being, you can't be funded by TIFs. And the TIF money is supposed to be spent where it's collected. All right. Back to you, JP,
Oh,
for news of
thank
the
you.
day. Hot
Yeah,
off the presses.
so, I mean, this is, so one of the tests we do, I mean, this is, again, it's so in front of you. It's like in front of us. It's ridiculous. So we often look at news of the day to find out how TIFs are being utilized in our local municipalities. And that's one of the ways to do some research. Okay, so we've told you we gave you the summary of TIFs. We've showed you sort of like how they're supposed to be designed and delivered. And we've showed you it's this national phenomenon, right? That this is not just happening in Chicago, but it's all over the country. 20,000 plus TIF districts across the country, across hundreds of thousands of municipalities. We have an estimate of 40 billion. And remember, based on the breakdown, that's 50% of that almost is going to what? Is coming from public schools. We have a public education crisis in our country, and $20 billion is being extracted from these schools across the country to support private development, right? And so we just have to look at the news. This is the Lincoln Yards in Lincoln Park. This is a $1.3 billion TIF district setup. The Cortland Chicago River TIF plan includes $400 million in financing costs alone. It's developed by Sterling Bay. It's literally a multi-billion-dollar project to be, right? And this was rushed through literally days before Emmanuel left office. You can't make this up. But it's all in front of you. Go Google it, check your news out. And in this process here, the very people who are supposed to do that eligibility study, is that sort of objective study of why this TIF is needed in this area, were close friends of Sterling Bay, right? So Sterling Bay hired his own people, basically, colleagues, to do the study that was submitted to the city for a redevelopment proposal. So it's all in-house, right? This is another part of the news. We're in the news for the day. This is the Project 78 at the River Roosevelt. This is proposed. It's another $1 billion project. And again, sum up what you learned. This place is supposed to be blighted. It's supposed to be places where we put and infuse money to create robust, healthy economies. But this is a multi-billion project. And again, this project includes $400 million for just financing costs, right? It's the former Michael Reese Hospital location. But before I move on, those two mega TIFs were pushed through right before Emmanuel left office. And Mayor Lightfoot had a chance. One of her promises was to dramatically at least reform TIFs, if not put a stop on them. And she did not do that. And that was the first real test of her administration. But don't take our word for it. Go straight to the news. We've got $1.1 billion TIFs in 78. We've got $1.3 billion TIFs set up in Lincoln Park Yards. Combined is $2.4 billion will be allocated to these TIF districts. Chicago TIF consultants selected by Sterling Bay. So they selected the consultant to submit the proposal. Remember that process? You have to come up with a proposal, and it has to go through a vetting process, right? So they literally, had the green light from the very beginning. So there was no objective proposal saying this is a great idea, or these are the blighted, this is the test, all this stuff. All was done and wrapped in bows, and billions of dollars are being maneuvered and diverted to support two major developments in affluent areas for the most part. Here we are again. These are three mega projects. And so if you look at them, and from my angle of cities, to me, they literally look like they're building what we call mini cities, right? Have you ever been to New York? Have you ever been to Paris? You ever been to these places? They have mini cities within cities, right? And those mini cities are really geared towards the affluent, geared towards a national tourist attraction piece. They're based in prosperous, mostly white parts of Chicago. And in an online public meeting on May 4th, 2020, a staffer from the Department of Planning and Development admitted that $31 million TIF, $9 million for the Bronzeville TIF, and $22 million from 47th King Drive. Other TIFs fundings are under review. So what we're seeing is a lot of money exchanging hands to people with very little oversight and very little access and transparency. And the outcome is, if you build these mini cities now and juxtapose them against our neglected neighborhoods, it's totally, it's a travesty, it's an injustice in my viewpoint. But before we move into policy issues, we want to definitely give you some time to digest what you've taken in so far. This is a photo shot. We were literally in front of the Lincoln Yards. You found it, Tom, that's great. There's some of our colleagues there and TIFs now. We were part of a local newspaper story on the Lincoln Yard TIF. And so here we are. I want to take a second for you all to pause, reflect, reactions, observations, responses, questions, thoughts, ideas. Give you guys a chance to digest a little bit here. Thoughts and reflections.
Yeah, so this was really helpful for me. I actually didn't know what TIF was, just in general, before this presentation. So it just got me thinking of just as far as policies, not even just in the Chicago area or the state of Illinois, but just nationally, just being able to actually understand what you're standing for or against. So this was just really informative as far as just the information and just being able to understand specifically what TIF is.
Great.
Thanks, Lucas.
Remington put a comment in chat where he says an older gentleman who says he's moving to a business around the river. He said all the money is being put in around the river, so the TIF money is supporting affluent areas instead of blighted areas. Do you think that there's sort of like a switcheroo here? It's kind of might smell like a reverse Robin Hood possibility, right? That they're selling it to you as if it's going to help people in need, but it's actually not. Well, hold on to that thought. We're going to hammer that pretty hard in just a few minutes, but I think it's an excellent observation.
Any other reflections? Thank you, Remington. Thanks, Lucas. Any other reflections? Celia, Tom, Emily?
Sorry, I apologize. I missed part of the class. I just wanted to be really clear on what exactly a TIF was. Is this actually dollars, or is this a tax break to certain businesses who are building these projects?
Right. So it's a good point of clarification. There are two major ways that a government can help a business. One is through an outright cash grant. So here's some money to do your thing. That is what a TIF is. It's a one-way transfer of public money. It's not a loan, so there's no like interest, and we don't get an equity position. So it's not like the city is putting in 30%, say, of my Tom Tresser's mall, and the city holds 30% of it. So like when Tom Tresser, sell the mall, and I sell it for $3 million profit, it's not like the city would get, $1 million of that profit. No, there's nothing like that. The other thing is what you were referencing is a tax abatement or forgiveness. So you would say, well, okay, the Tom Tresser Mall would normally throw off $200,000 of property tax a year because it's really sizzling, it's a really valuable property. But because we want to help you, we're going to give you a break. You only have to pay $100,000. So it's a little snakier. It's not as sexier to talk about because it's harder to track money that you don't collect. And it is a very popular thing all across America, to the tune of between $40 and $50 billion every year. We're talking about all units of government at every level with these tax gifts. And we're just, over the last 4 or 5 years, we're just getting smarter about how to speak about this and show it in a way that is persuasive, because it's hard to talk about money you don't collect. But a super question.
Awesome. Thanks, Remington. Any questions? This is the opportunity to learn from the inside out. So thank you for the questions, Remington. Anything, if you're not clear about how this works, this is the opportunity to really get it settled. Okay, reflections. What are people feeling? How are you feeling about this? Is this relevant? Does this make sense? Does it not make sense? Is it connecting to what you're thinking about? all of you've chosen areas of the budget to look at: law enforcement, education, was it COVID relief, public health. Think about the areas that you want to focus on. How is this relevant to those areas? What do you think, Eli?
This is all really frustrating to me because I remember when it was probably 2 months ago, I was applying for grants for my business. And I had to, for one, be in a TIF district to even receive any grants. And this was even through an external,
Really?
it was providing the grants. And so I'm on Bryn Mawr, and on the south side of Bryn Mawr is the Uptown TIF district. And then I'm on the north side of it, so I don't qualify for any of that. So even beyond the TIF thing, I can't even get a couple $1,000s of funding just to help out with COVID relief because of these stupid TIF rules.
Wow, so it's like directly impacting your business and your quality of life, and you able to earn income. It's huge. Thank you for sharing, Eli. What about you, Emily, Dana, Tom, Fagan, Celia? Weigh in on this. How is this sitting with you?
It's not sitting well with me, obviously. It's just makes me wonder, and this is probably kind of off topic. Why does it have to be this way? Why are people so greedy? Why? Like, why does it have to be this way? It's just so sad. It's very sad.
Well, I don't think that, I think that's not off. Any question is not off topic. And that, what you're doing is that question, why, is the central most important question of any good community organizer. Why does this have to be? What's the rationale behind this grossly practice of economic injustice? So that's, good questions. Hold on to them and keep driving those questions forward. So that's a very smart question. Dana, how are you feeling?
No, I totally feel like the same way what she just said. Like, I feel like it's just totally unfair. Like, my dad owned his own business. He unfortunately passed away, but like a couple years ago. But I just feel like I feel a strong way about it. Like, it's totally not fair. Like, the 1%, like, who they have. Yeah, no, I can't go on. It's like it's really frustrating.
Yeah. Okay. Well, express it. Let it out. Don't hold it in. This is an opportunity. Let's be clear. You're not just somebody on the corner. You're coming into this with the privilege of being at your universities, and you're being sent into the world to make change happen. Let's be clear about that. Whether it's in private or public practice. So by all means, digest, share with us your thoughts and what you're thinking, so we all can grow in this space. It's huge. It is very frustrating. Emily, where you at?
Kind of the same as everybody else, just frustrated with the amount of greed. Like the concept of it, I just did a quick Google search to see. I live in Uptown, and I was curious what some of the TIF projects in my area are. And things like the Uptown Theater, like that could be a really great, and that is a project, like things like that could potentially be really great for the community and like putting money into like community spaces, but everything else is like apartments and converting what's like a gentrifying neighborhood. And it's just like knowing that money is definitely not going back to the people who are being kicked out of those buildings or who used to live in those buildings. It's I don't know. I'm same as everybody else, just frustrated with the greed and the misdirection of resources.
Well, but Emily, you just hit on a major theme or issue of modern urban life is gentrification. So could someone tell us what is meant by gentrification? If gentrification is happening, what is occurring? You said it. So what do you mean?
I mean, I can. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know if you were asking somebody else. So
anybody, but go ahead.
So I guess it's kind of along these same lines when there's like a low income area, a blighted area, pretty much, and people come in and developers convert. Like I, for example, live in definitely a gentrified building that used to be low income housing, was very dilapidated, was bought up by a company that's doing the same thing to a lot of buildings in the area. And then they make nice amenity rich buildings that they rent to 20 something white people, and the neighborhood gradually shifts demographics as those people move in. Higher end grocery stores come in, pushing out the lower income, more affordable places. So people who originally lived in the neighborhood are forced to move into a more affordable area.
I'd say that's an excellent encapsulation of the market. And you can say, well, that's just capitalism. It's like, you know, is it anyone's fault? You know, is it, you know, is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Should we care about the people who are moved out, right? Did they get a good price when they sold? Maybe they didn't want to move. I mean, there's many, many questions of morality and politics and policy. It raises many, many questions about who designs our cities, who designs all this. Is it a free-for-all? And we don't really care about Mrs. Jones, who had her little house there on 63rd Street, and now she can't afford to pay the property taxes. Too bad for her. There's a lot of great issues that surface, and you know, we don't have time to touch on them, but just know that this issue of TIFs is right into the heart of this example of planning, gentrification. Do we care about Mrs. Jones on 63rd Street? Should we care? Who, you know, all good, powerful questions for you in this class and others.
Right. And so the idea, and I think Tom really said it clear, that TIFs is at the center of this. The TIF scheme is the city's primary community development arm, which is kind of scary to think about as we move forward in this. But one of the things we do when we look at this from an organizing perspective is we begin to look at these major, what we see intractable issues. They're so frustrating. There's so much greed, all these things that seem beyond our capacity to even look at. We actually think this is an opportunity. It's ripe for opportunity here, right? So when we see crisis, when we see these major challenging problems or issues like TIFs or anything else, cases and just whatever it is, we our organizing brain, you know, turns on, and we begin to shift our approach and perspective towards looking at this from an asset point of view. Say, okay, what are opportunities to organize and advocate and build power to take on this greed, to take on this orchestrated effort. We really talk about moving from policy problems to organizing opportunities, right? That's part of the, yeah, before you break up, but really shifting your brain, say, oh my God, it's frustrating. I can't think about this. As organizers and leaders, your job is to digest it, dissect it, and move it, and see this through a lens of opportunity, through a lens of asset development, and begin to put together what are those organizing and advocacy opportunities that we can begin to work on to take on the powers that be.
And you may think about this exercise as an exercise of translation. So this is one of our strengths as activists and organizers and educators. We don't want to just study something, which is what the nonprofit sector loves to do, is to study shit. But the challenge as champions of justice is how to figure out to take the data or the situation that we've discovered and turn it into action so that people can understand the conditions on the ground and can begin to see a way to fight them or to change them. And part of what we're going to share with you now are our attempts at translating the conditions that we've discovered into things that we can fight around, and that you can talk to your neighbors in such a way that it'll be relevant to them and actionable. So the first thing that we say is, look, TIFs starve local government. So if you use any of the public services, which we just discussed, and often when we're in a physical meeting, a public meeting, we will often say, how did you guys even get to the meeting? And someone will say, I took the bus. or I walked. And that's an opportunity to go back to that discussion about public. Well, that's public stuff. You use it every day. So it's a good opportunity as organizers and educators to remind ourselves about this public stuff business. And it just doesn't live by itself. It needs money. It's like an engine that has to have fuel. If you starve it of fuel, it sputters and will go out. And just to remind you, the property tax dollars that we're talking about fund these things that we use every day. And as Jonathan said, and as you affirmed, the people who need these things the most tend to be Black and brown people of modest means, or working class people of modest means. So if you're wealthy, you may have your own private limousine. You may have a private school that you'd send your child to. You know what I'm saying? You may have a big backyard. You don't need to go to a park. But for many, 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 many people, they need these public things in order to live a good life and to advance themselves, especially our public schools. The public schools have been part of America's story since the 1600s. The role of public education in the life of our economy and the life of our democracy cannot be understated. So anything that attacks public stuff, in our opinion, is not good. So that's one way that you might engage people in this conversation. When you talk about, hey, do you have kids in public school? Do you use public transportation to get to your work? Do you rely on public libraries for your education and edification, etc.?
And just real quick, Tom, even if you don't, even if you got kids in private school, we're all interconnected here.
We're all
when I get up, drive downtown to drop my kids at Daystar, I'm using the roads, right? Everybody uses public services at some point in the city of Chicago.
Yeah, it would be impossible to live in the city without it. And you might say, well, I don't have kids in public school. Can I not pay those taxes? Or I'm allergic to grass. I don't go to the parks. So, can I not pay that part of my taxes that are being spent on parks? No, that would be an absurd situation. The next thing we say about TIFs is that this definition of blight we call out as meaningless. And it's hypocritical and so elastic as to be applied to anything in America, in Chicago. So here are some places that have been declared blight that are not, including the Loop, and including Halsted and Monroe in Greektown, where this particular grocery store was built with $7 million in TIF money. And in my own community, literally a 5-minute walk from my house in Lincoln Park to where the Apple store is, next to the CTA station for Clybourne. And right behind it is an old warehouse that was renovated into Grossinger Auto. That's like their showroom and a mega showcase and repair headquarters. Well, Ben Grossinger got $8.5 million in TIF money to refurbish that warehouse. And it's completely not blighted, not by any stretch of the imagination. Now, this is an argument that we want to spend a few minutes on. It's pretty critical to our analysis of TIFs, and it's going to take a little explaining. So we said that the TIF money is supposed to be spent where collected. That's the idea of it. And here's the problem we have with that idea, that they cause economic inequity and bolster segregation. That the TIF hoards taxes in prosperous communities, starving the poor ones. So this is back to Remington, when we're talking about the reverse Robin Hood idea that you intuited to. So think about it. If your community is poor and there's not a lot of income and your houses are just hanging in there, you don't have a lot of extra wealth to fix your house up, and you might have 2 or 3 generations. So things are kind of dicey and you're going day to day. Your community is not wealthy. And so if I'm looking at the increase in the value of the properties, they may just be, edging up a little every year. They may even be flat, or sadly, in many communities of color in Chicago, the properties are actually worth less this year than they were last year. So there's a term called underwater. Your property may be declining in value. Well, if there's a TIF district around you, your property isn't contributing anything. The TIF district may have just, relatively few dollars in it over time. So you really can't do anything from that TIF district. However, If there's a TIF district, as there is in the West Loop, South Loop, what happens there? You build a high rise that has 30 stories, 200 units, each unit selling for $400 to $1 million. That one building may be throwing off $1 million in property tax just by itself, one building. Well, since it was built in a TIF district, none of that money will go into the body politic. It all will stay in the TIF district to be used, presumably, for other things in that same area. So there's a situation where the rich gets rich and the poor get nothing, which is why this little heat map published by the Chicago Reporter is glowing bright red in TIF revenue expenditures in the super loop where the wealth is. Now you contrast that to a poor Black community. So this is the 42nd Ward again, which is bright with TIF projects. You can see every blue dot is a TIF. This is the loop. You contrast that with a poor community. So here are some of the projects that were funded by TIFs in this rich white loop area. $54 million for the conversion of an office building into apartments. $11 million to build PepsiCo's Midwest headquarters. $5 million for the refurbishing of an old office building into a hotel. $10 million for the construction of the Chicago Title and Trust headquarters across the street from the State of Illinois building. Almost 19 million for the refurbishing of the Oriental Theater. And almost $11 million to renovate an old office building, 2 floors of it in the Loop for Sears. However, Sears is doing very poorly and they moved out of that store after a few years. And of course, there was no refund. This is a project that has been getting a lot of attention by the mayor called Invest Southwest. And what the mayor is proposing is to take $250 million from her TIF piggy banks and invest them in 10 communities of color. The lists of which are in the blue box. 8 are Black and 2 are Latinx. So she's going to take that money, split it up, essentially giving $25 million to each of those communities. And you can see in the small map, those community areas. So imagine $25 million in monies for small businesses, presumably to be either built or subsidized in those 10 communities. Those 10 communities take up about 28,000 acres and contain 488,000 residents as human beings who are living there, and they're all mostly 99% people of color. All right, you contrast that with the 2 TIFs we just brought to your attention, the ones that Jonathan mentioned, the related TIF, related projects, 1.1 billion for the Project 78, and Lincoln Yards being developed by Sterling Bay, 1.3, a total of $2.4 billion for those 2 projects that take up 303 acres that has nobody living there because there was vacant land. And who's going to live in those projects? I think, as Jonathan mentioned, these 2 like super cities, all swanky and full of upscale retail. It ain't going to be anybody from those communities of color. They're going to be people like me, frankly. And maybe perhaps like you, perhaps. Upper, middle, certainly more tended to be white with college degrees or advanced degrees. The people are going to be living in those 2 communities when they're constructed a few years from now. So that's 10 times more than the mayor is contemplating giving to almost 500,000 people of color who are living right now. So that doesn't make any sense to us. So that's our analysis, if you will, through an equity lens of this project, which is getting much love in the press. All right, another way to talk about this TIF money, it's like a slush fund. So when you think of a slush fund, it really means money that doesn't have any strings attached to it. That some person of power has literally a pot of money they can just sort of give out at their whim on their own criteria. There's no forms to fill out, And in this case, it's the mayor. The mayor has the power to distribute this money from her TIF accounts with the blessing of the city council, but as we showed you pretty convincingly, there's no instance where a city council will say no to the mayor of Chicago. So these are just a few examples of the last few years in which TIF money has entered into some conversation or civic situation and has been used like spackle to smooth over something. You may recall that Mayor Emanuel was trying to woo Amazon here a few years ago. And between him and the mayor and the governor of Illinois, they were offering Amazon a subsidy package of almost $2.5 billion to incent Amazon to move their headquarters to here, of which at least $650 million was going to be TIF money from the city. So that was, it didn't happen. So, you know, there's no report we can give you about it, but just from what we know about the documents that were leaked, that was on the table. A few years ago, Mayor Emanuel avoided a teacher strike by reaching into the TIF piggy bank for $88 million, which he put into the contract. Also, Mayor Emanuel, with now Mayor Lightfoot's assent, wants to build what is called the Cop Academy, a combined training facility for police and firemen, for $95 million, with at least half of that coming from TIF money.
And we know that's going to be over budget, by the way. So, you know.
Yeah, it's probably more like 120. When Mayor Lightfoot came into office, she looked at the books that she inherited from Mayor Emanuel and found there was about $830 million deficit that she had to deal with. And so what she did is she went into the TIF piggy bank for $300 million. She just on her own say-so emptied $300 million out of that $1.5 billion at the time. And one of her aides was quoted in the press by saying, "It's 2 o'clock. That is scraping the mayonnaise jar. We went through and aggressively surplused every single TIF, and there's nothing left." Well, we say you didn't go far enough. There's still quite a few tasty mayonnaise TIF in that jar, at least $1.5 billion. So this is proving our point. We also say that these TIF monies are not just slush fund, but they're super secretive, because inside the process, we find the city moves the money around. So they move it from TIF to TIF, which is actually a contravention of the rule that says the TIF money has to be spent where it's collected, because they can also move it from one TIF to another. So remember the map that showed a lot of TIFs were touching? Well, when a TIF touches one to another, money can go from in between the TIFs in a way that defies any public explanation. But what we do find is that almost 50% of all the money that's collected every year does get moved around. So it's like a shell game inside of a shell game, if you will. That maddens people that just don't like that kind of secrecy. You know, it's not good government. Whether you like TIFs or not, whether you think giving money to a business is a good idea or not, you can still protest the secretness, the secret nature of how this money is allocated. We find that TIFs corrupt politicians. When there's so much money at stake, is it any surprise to learn that developers and their associates who are involved in TIF projects give campaign contributions to the aldermen who allocate the TIF money? So what we find over and over again, aldermen receive cash contributions from the developer, the lawyer, the contractor involved in the TIF projects in their ward. So Carrie Austin with the South Side 34th Ward received almost $15,000 from the developers of 2 projects that received about $23 million.
She's under indictment still or not?
What's that?
She's under indictment, right?
No, she's not. She's under investigation.
Investigation, okay.
Because of how she's used federal loans for her own private property. Walter Burnett is not under investigation. He's the 27th Ward Alderman. He got $3,000 from the developer of that Mariano's grocery store that I showed you a few slides ago. Danny Solis is in big trouble. He wore a wire for the FBI for 2 years and has been in the press lately. His political operations received $64,000 from the developers of just one project back in the day. And Brian Hopkins, who is another incumbent alderman, received $6,000 from the tax lawyer for Sterling Bay, the developer of Lincoln Yards. And this project is in his ward. And Alderman Hopkins has been a strong defender and champion at every turn of Lincoln Yards. Is $6,000 enough to persuade him? In other words, did he really think that Lincoln Yards was bogus? Or does he think Lincoln Yards is a great project and he'll take the $6,000 anyway? It's hard to say in a place like Chicago, which is the most corrupt city in America, as we've already told you. When you have money clouding people's judgment, it's hard to believe that they're really acting on the public's interest when there's money involved like this. And one of my favorite stories is this guy, Alderman Ed Burke, who for decades was the chairman of the Finance Committee of the City Council. The Finance Committee, as Jonathan showed you on that complicated chart, was one of the last stops in approving a TIF. You cannot have a TIF without the Finance Committee of the City Council first blessing it. And this guy ran the show for decades. He was, his phones were tapped, and the guy he was shaking down, a business owner, wanted TIF money. So like Eli, I think somebody was saying that, you know, can I get some TIF money? Well, if you pay off this guy, you might have gotten your TIF money. And when they released the transcript, the businessman was complaining, I need his favor for my TIF money. His favor being Alderman Burke. And, you know, it's kind of, I don't know whether to laugh or cry. It's pretty bad. All right. If you're more policy wonkish and are amenable to another argument, try this one. TIFs have nothing to do with economic development. But wait, Tom, you say, aren't they created and ginned out exactly in the name of economic development? Aren't they being administered by the Department of Economic Development in the city of Chicago? And yes, they are. However, the academics tell us they're completely irrelevant to economic development. In fact, the literature shows that cities that don't have TIFs do as well or better than cities with them. So the TIFs are really nothing to do with economic development. They have to do with clout and power. And to tell you, you know, the other side of the story, as I mentioned, a Black community, the 24th Ward, if you go pretty much straight west from the Loop, you know, when you get to Douglas Park, you're in the Lawndale community. That's the most TIF community in Chicago. And at one point, about 100% of the community was in a TIF one way or another. And I think if you would just jump in your car right now or could somehow be transported into the middle of that community there in Ogden, say in Archer, you'll see a lot of vacant land. You'll see a lot of troubles. You'll see poverty rates, disease rates, things that are not very good for the community. So how come these TIFs haven't helped them? Well, for the reasons that we're speaking of today. What we found also is that school districts are getting smart about all this crazy stuff, and they are starting to sue their own mayors. So you're seeing a strange a cavalcade of lawsuits across the country where a school board says, don't rob us, Mayor Tresser. Don't put a TIF on us and take money away off our budget. We don't have enough as it is. And so they lawyer up, which is happening more and more as the world is getting tougher and tougher to live in. And the poor taxpayer of that jurisdiction is paying both the prosecution of the lawsuit because they're paying the bills of the lawyer for the school district, but they're also defending because they're paying the bills of the lawyer for the mayor to go into the court and defend the TIF. And that's what happened in the city of Oak Park, just to the west of Chicago. A few years ago, a lawsuit dragged on for a year, cost $600,000. When I spoke to the school board member, she said the following: economic development is not the business of school districts, education is. TIFs take dollars from schools. The best economic development localities can do is provide great education. When dollars from education go into these deals, the game never comes out favorably for students. So that's another voice to consider. And finally, as we said before, this whole thing is off the books, harming the overall budgeting process of our city, making it harder to understand what the true nature of our finances is, and actually corroding our finances year after year after year of this game, forcing the mayor often to go to other sources for revenue. And it's like going to a payday loan store. And I hope nobody on this call has ever had to do that, because it means you're going to pay an exorbitant rate, sometimes up to 400% to borrow. And that doesn't make any sense. It certainly doesn't make any sense for a family, and it makes no sense for a city. And yet that's what Mayor Emanuel did a few years ago. He went to a source for a quick loan of $1 billion, and also encumbered us with $1 billion in interest. So you have to pay the $1 billion back, and to the borrower, he must pay another $1 billion in interest. So if anyone thinks that that's a good idea, I have the Tom Tresser credit card that you can sign up online, and I will happily lend anyone on this call $100 to $1,000, no questions asked. You just have to promise to pay me back 100% inside of 3 weeks. And if anybody wants that deal, talk to me later. I'll send you the money right away. Now, what could that $1 billion have bought? Instead of spending it to our friends on Wall Street, we could have bought 5,200 homes and just given them away. All right. JP, take us home with some of the big picture questions. I think you might be muted.
Sorry, guys. What we want to leave you with some key policy questions to consider going forward. These are the big picture issues, right? That kind of surfaced from this work. Policy question 1, under what circumstances do we give public money to private business? I'm gonna repeat it and think about it. So I want you to take a moment to think about the question. Under what circumstances do we give public dollars, right, to private business? That's a huge policy question. It's a big picture question, right? It goes to the heart of privatization. It goes to the heart of what is a government for in terms of taxes. What are our taxes for? And you know, we have a position on it, but we want you to think about it. That question. Next question, policy question. Policy question 2: who plans what for whom? In other words, what defines community development? Right, and this is a critical question to think about, as part of your project will be to start servicing past community development plans for the city. Right, there's dozens of community development plans on the shelf, literally, that have been developed by so many different groups, but haven't really been, have been regulated to the shelf and haven't been really utilized to build out the communities. So what defines community development? What does that mean? Who's defining it and for whom? Policy question 3, and this is something that came from the book. Based on everything that we're learning and summarizing, is the city broke? Right? This is the call across the whole country. Right? Municipalities are actually going bankrupt. They don't have the resources. Right? Look what happened in Texas. Right? The mayor in that one small place in Texas talked about that we're not here to help you. Fend for yourself, right? Our city's broke in this country. Is Chicago broke? And as you can see, there's billions of dollars being regulated and diverted and used here and there, and yet continuing messages that we're broke. We can't afford PPE equipment, so we ask all citizens to donate PPE equipment, right? We can't afford to feed our people, so we ask people to donate food. We can't afford our homeless shelters. We have over 80,000 people homeless in the city, right? So there's so many major challenges, and they keep saying we're broke, and yet for some reason we're seeing billions of dollars being traded left and right in front of us. So is Chicago broke? Big question. last big policy question, big picture question. Who's watching our back? Right? I mean, the idea of a democracy, a representative democracy, is that we vote people into office who are supposed to watch our back, help us, right? That's the idea, right? And so the idea is who's actually watching out for the people of Chicago, the people working every day in and day out. And so from that, is there a need for new leadership, right? Is there a need for a new generation of leaders to go into places, both elected and not elected, to make change happen? And that's going to be part of your grassroots campaign training. You're going to learn, like, you may never run for office, but you will learn what it takes to run for office. And out there, as activists, as social justice change agents, you may participate in a campaign. And so you'll know what to look out for in terms of the candidate, in terms of the structure. But at the end of the day, we need some type of robust effort to change the old guard, put in new leadership that can address these challenging issues. And guess what? Tag, you're it. There's no one else coming to your rescue, right? And so that leads us ultimately to the campaign that we've launched after years of TIF reform. We've been doing this, talking about TIF reform, talking about it, and things just keep getting worse and worse, right? And so we finally came to our conclusion at this point. They've had, how many years since 86? 20 plus years to get it right?
30.
20 plus, 30 years, 3 decades. Hey, you have opportunity leadership. 3 decades, please get it right. Get the money to where we actually need it. And we see time and time again that that's not happening in the body of politics. So at this point, our position, based on our assessment, our landscape assessment, our assessment of this scheme, and looking at the gross corruption that's taking place, that we need to put all that TIF money back into the public units of government and hold those units of government accountable. Absolutely. Hold the schools accountable, hold the parks accountable, address the inequities in terms of resources in those institutions. But the TIF is not the answer. The TIF is exasperating, it's enhancing, it's actually expanding racial inequity. It's actually divesting from Black and brown neighborhoods, as we're seeing in real time. And so we position ourselves to say, end the TIF scheme now. It's clearly a racist slush fund being used by the political officials, by the developers, everybody who are plugged into the TIF trough. And so we're saying, end it now. Return the funds back to the communities that you've harmed. We now know how much of that TIF funds came from Black and brown communities. That's how deep this is. We can now track, oh, you took this much from here, this much from here. We can estimate now how much in totality TIF funds were extracted from Black and brown communities. And so this ends our TIF 101. Please go to this website. This is our website we want to show you. It's been up for a while. We have a petition that will be part of the work, is to increase the petition. Check it out. It's right there in front of you. There's a link in the chat. Download the link. This is our website where we want to shut down this practice, this horrific and economic injustice practice. We want you to sign the petition, and we're going to help. We want you to help us get more people to sign, right? We want thousands of people to say enough is enough. You can't use this practice to continue the harm that's being done irreparably to our communities and our fellow neighbors in Chicago. And so next week, we now shift you from knowledge-based learning, right? We're shifting you now to what are the tools and the skills you need to fight for justice and equity in Chicago or beyond, wherever you live. Check out your own TIFs. If you find out if there's TIFs in your local municipal area, and are those funds being utilized in such a way that's increasing injustice or alleviating the current situations. And so Community Organizing 101 is next in a second, Tom. You will learn about organizing from the baseline. You'll learn what is organizing, what's not, what are the skills associated with this. And again, you may not end up being a community organizer, but you're gonna have that skill set. You're gonna need a multi toolkit when you're out there in service of others.